In this lesson, we're going to be looking at a number of questions related to school and education and learning. And when I teach this lesson in a class setting, I have people begin with a mini session where I ask them to reflect for a few minutes on where they got their early messages about their own intelligence. Were you made to feel smart? Were you made to feel not smart? Were you compared to other people as smarter or less smart than they? And not just looking at school, but looking at a whole different range of where adults and peers gave us our messages about how well our brains work. We're going to look at what goes on in our experiences in school, particularly in formal schooling. And what I need to say first is that school, from the beginning of its creation as an institution, has not been set up with the needs of children in mind. It's been set up to prepare kids to be good worker bees as adults, to be cogs in a system, to do what they're told, to be intimidated, to be controlled, and to not be questioning, to believe what they're told, regurgitate it, and perform. And there have been various efforts over the history of formal education to try to buck that, to try to set up classroom contexts that actually support creativity, that actually support critical thinking, that actually think about what children's real needs might be. But nothing that's gone very far in that direction that's gotten very popular or widespread. Certainly there have been some improvements and innovations in some areas. But by and large, to this day, the educational system is still focused on controlling kids and on getting them to absorb what they're told to absorb uncritically and be able to regurgitate it back. And actually, in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a heavy push in educational policy back towards the worst aspects of education, back towards creating a class of school graduates that will be good for their owners of their companies, who won't ask too many questions, who won't complain, and who won't join unions. This is really about creating people who are cooperative and unthinking. And a very two-tiered educational system where people from a moneyed background are permitted to think for themselves and get much different kind of teaching, a very different kind of learning in their educational experiences, because they're supposed to become the owners and the managers of their various agencies and companies. So you're being prepared to either be in charge or be the ones that, where you do what you're told. So to a great extent, we are carrying really quite serious injuries from our school experiences, and I'm certainly no exception to this. And I'm going to come back to talk about some of what's been important in a positive sense to us about our school experiences. I don't want to make it sound like it's just all injury. But we need to look first at the darker side of what's going on. Kids were not meant to spend their lives indoors. It's a really bad start. It's really, that's not the way it's been for kids through some vast majority, 95%, 98% of human history. Kids spend most of their time outdoors and in motion. So this is very recent, just the past 1,000 years or whatever, where kids suddenly are being told to sit still indoors and learn. So it's boring for kids. It makes kids feel incredibly restless, makes them feel starved for motion and entertainment, and completely outside of what children's actual nature is, really what human nature is. So it's wounding kids from the start, because of that collision with what kids actually want and need and enjoy. And unfortunately, the adult world has really tended to take the stand of like, you just got to grow up. Like, don't let this bother you. This is about being mature or something. You just got to do this. Like, this is just how life is. And that's actually, through most of human history, not been how life has been. Kids have been involved in what's going on in their communities. They've spent their time running around and, yes, contributing in various ways, but in motion, not in stillness, and being exposed to people of all ages. So instead, what we're doing is we're taking them away from old people. We're taking them away from babies and toddlers. They're only with their own age group, and maybe people in age very close to that group, but pretty much just their own age group, so completely age stratified, and they have to sit still and listen to things that for the most part aren't interesting to them, and do kind of different kinds of exercises, written exercises or talking exercises or whatever, that again are not very interesting to them. So it's a painful experience. It's also can be a really lonely experience. So you're in a class with whatever, 20 kids, 30 kids. That means that your emotional needs are not being met very well. No one's really hugging you. Even the most caring teacher can't meet the emotional needs of 20 or 30 kids. It's just not possible to do. Kids are being discouraged from talking to each other, and they're being told that they need to sit separately and not touch each other, so they're not getting their needs for touch and affection met. This is an environment where there is tremendous grief and accumulated wounding happening to us as the years go by. There are a couple of other really serious, actually there's a multitude of serious problems, but a couple of others that I'll underline. One is we're being graded. So we're being taught from very early on that we are going to be measured and told in this very ranking way whether we are measuring up, and it's going to compare us to other kids, and we're actually going to get messages that encourage us to compare ourselves to other kids. And we need to understand that it's wounding to kids to not only to be made to feel that they are inferior to other students, it's wounding to kids to make them feel that they're superior to other students. Why is that part wounding? Because it makes them feel apart. And the human being does not like to feel separated, does not like to feel apart. And you see all kinds of destructive psychological effects in kids who've been made to feel that they're better than other kids. It's not the same set of things that happen to kids who are made to feel worse than other kids, but it's just a different set of injuries. And so the whole process of being measured, ranked, graded, compared to other kids that's a really destructive process. Creativity is being stifled. You're not spending your day drawing. You're not spending your day working with clay. You're not spending your day making music. In fact, those are considered extra elements of the curriculum. And you're lucky if those are like a couple hours out of the week. As you get older, they're likely to completely disappear from your curriculum. And it's the areas of creativity is what's most likely to get cut when budgets are tight. And so that whole aspect of the human being is being lost. And debate, the notion that there are differences of opinion, not likely to have many opportunities to enter anywhere in here. Your own opinions don't matter. Your disagreements don't matter. And in fact, if you're really bothered by this system and you say, this isn't right, you're not teaching us right, you're not treating us right, this isn't a good system, you're going to run into a whole set of other wounds, because you're going to get labeled a bad kid, you're going to get labeled non-compliant, and all kinds of punishments and so forth, loss of privileges and freedom are going to come down on you because of that. And the notion that it's just acceptable for kids to be unhappy is woven into this system. I experienced this directly as a parent, where I had a child that had periods of being extremely unhappy at school, and school administrators, teachers just told me, well, you can't expect all kids to be happy at school. That's just not the way it's going to be. That's not realistic. But it's just somehow acceptable for your child to be unhappy for huge portions of each day in their lives. You're basically saying it's okay that child's getting wounded. It's okay that child is accumulating distress and is going to be in more and more pain as the years go by. Our experiences at school are some of the most powerful experiences we have, specifically with respect to what are the senses that we develop of whether we're smart people or not. And there's so many things that go on at school that make kids feel stupid, often the ways they're getting spoken to by adults or by other kids, but also the ways you're being measured and ranked, and also the way you're being expected to just be able to grasp things at the same speed that other people grasp them. You're supposed to do well in areas that aren't your strengths, and the areas that are your strengths aren't necessarily really being noticed that much. And kids also get labeled by systems. Like once they decide, oh, you're not one of the fast kids, and then suddenly you're in the slow class. There's tremendous class prejudice in school systems where kids from certain neighborhoods or kids whose parents worked with their hands are going to be assumed right away that they're not going to be as bright. They're more likely to be channeled towards vocational training or channeled towards the lower level classes. Just you're just working with this assumption that's working against you, that you're not very smart. Sexism plays a role in here with these years of the assumption that girls really shouldn't be doing math and science because those are the things that the boys are going to be particularly good at and aren't for girls. And all this channeling and class prejudice, sex prejudice, obviously racial prejudice playing a role in who's getting labeled as smart or not smart, or who's being thought of in those terms. This can have a crushing effect on whether we think of ourselves as smart people or not. So as you work to heal, this is part of what you're working to recover, is your awareness that actually you're a very smart person. And you need to process some of these early experiences, so many of which happened at school, where you were made to feel that you're not smart. The effects of these school experiences, besides just the emotional effects of the way it wounds our enthusiasm for life and the way it affects our spirits long term, are that it also really just affects how we feel about education in general and how we feel about learning. And learning should just be a joyful process. We should just be excited about learning anything. Learning is one of the most wonderful experiences in human life. It's learning anything is so much fun and so interesting and so satisfying and so fulfilling. So it's a tragedy if we're coming into adult life having lost that joy in learning. So part of our healing has to involve unpacking and working through the wounds from those school experiences while trying to reclaim our right and our ability to learn lifelong and to be able to be delighted in that. And you'll see these wonderful examples of older people, retired people, for example, who are taking all these different classes. They're taking, plant identification classes, or they're learning a new language, or they're studying history. And if you ask them about it, they just say, it's just so wonderful to just be learning. Well, they're learning at a time in life where performance doesn't matter anymore, where no one's going to criticize them for what they're doing or not doing in the class, and where they're able to be back to how it should have been when they were kids, of just being able to delight in what you're learning. And then another message we're getting from all those experiences is that children don't have rights. And I can talk about that in much greater detail at another time. If you're familiar with my writings, like in The Joyous Recovery, I've written about that a lot already. But there's a particular dynamic that comes to mind with, I think, especially elementary school, where kids can be punished for misbehavior by not being allowed to go out for recess. And any of you who remember elementary school, you live for your recess. You long for it. You can't wait till it comes. It's such a relief to then be able to run around. Recess is typically outdoors, and you're just so glad to be able to be outdoors. I'm not saying that recess is all bliss. There are often some things that kids are struggling with about whether they're being included or not included in activities, or whether they're being mistreated, being bullied by other kids. But overall, this is what you most want, is your recess time. And the notion that you can be punished for misbehavior by having your recess taken away, to me, is no different from claiming that it would be okay to punish kids by not letting them eat or not letting them sleep. It's saying we're going to punish you by taking away your fundamental rights and by deciding that we're not going to meet your fundamental needs. Like, this is so bad for kids to not get their movement time, to not get their natural light time. And the reason I emphasize that one example is because that one example tells us almost everything we need to know about how formal schooling has been set up. Now, we also have, as we explore our histories with schooling and education, some positive aspects to these experiences that we want to notice, we want to talk about in our sessions, we want to be able to draw upon in our healing. One is kids form really important relationships with their teachers. And teachers did not create the educational system. Teachers, by and large, are people who want to do it right, who care about kids, who care about young people's learning, who actually would love to be engaged with young people's thinking, to be able to have discussion and debate. Sure, there are teachers who aren't really motivated. There are teachers who've been in the system too long and have lost all motivation, but that doesn't change the fact that overwhelmingly, the great majority of people who come into teaching because they're coming from a caring place. They didn't come in for the money. Teachers are so exploited economically. So why would they be there if it wasn't because they care? And so they're trying to do it right in a system that's working very hard against them, that's telling them, don't care about your kids, don't teach them to think critically, don't have reasonable class sizes so that you can actually nurture them somewhat. Teachers are trying to do what they can. And there are just amazing and inspiring school teachers. I know some of them now. I experienced some of them as a kid. Some. The relationships that kids form with their teachers are really important, and often from an emotional standpoint, the closest relationship they have with anybody other than their parents, and sometimes much better relationships than they have with their parents if their parents are particularly abusive or neglectful. And so we want to value the relationship we had with teachers. It's really worth spending some time in sessions exploring what you remember about the teachers that you cared about and what those positive relationships were like. Kids sometimes just look forward so much to seeing their teacher. They'll make excuses to stay after sometimes to talk to the teacher for a few minutes. They'll get in trouble in order to get to spend some time with the teacher. All those different kinds of elements. And so that's really significant. And the positive aspects of what happens in our relationships with peers in school is really important. And as I've said, it's a mistake that it's age stratified the way it is, that we're only with that 1 year or 2 year age spread. But at least we're around kids. And in the modern world, kids are more and more struggling with lack of access to other kids because people don't live in communities really anymore. And even where people do live in much tighter knit areas, then there's often a lot of fear about whether kids are safe, so kids are restricted. Anyhow, all kinds of challenges. Now we have the social media, the video screen challenge, all kinds of reasons why kids are lacking adequate access to other kids. So many of the behavior problems that kids have and so many of the frustrations that adults are having with kids nowadays is simply because kids don't have other kids that they could be spending their time with, and then we wouldn't be going through these things. So school at least is a place where kids get to be with other kids. And it's too bad that there's so much discouragement on their interacting with other kids. But they're happy to be where other kids are. They do have their time at lunch, at recess to get to interact with other kids. And that's an important part of the experience. So we do have some important positive memories to bring to light about our time and what all these social dramas that play out and kids who are, as you get older, who are romantically interested in other kids and all that stuff that plays out at school and the different groups that form. And of course, there are things that are hurtful about the way all that plays out also. But it's a really rich and important aspect of life that's positive about school. And then the last thing I want to say to people who are learning co-counseling is that so much of co-counseling is about regaining and reclaiming our power in the world and speaking up about what the world needs to be like, what it should look like, and getting more and more forceful in our advocacy for what's right and for what we believe in. So the nature of the educational system, the nature of kids' experience in that system, how teachers are treated in that system, those are all issues that really need to be on our radar and that we need to be outspoken about, and where we need to be looking at how can we build structures and institutions that are actually loving towards children and that are actually focused on meeting children's true needs and letting them be kids. And we need to get behind teachers. We need to get behind teachers' associations and teachers' unions. We need to get behind teachers actually having the freedom to teach the whole child instead of having to teach to standardized testing. We need to get standardized testing out of the schools. the high stakes testing that's been brought in just state after state after state over the last 20 or 30 years has just been a disaster for education. Oh, we're going to bring up the standards has done nothing but damage children's experience and has done nothing but damage to teachers' ability to do what they're there wanting to do and believing in doing. So pushing for educational change is related to our own individual healing. And we all talk in co-counseling about how taking action in the world is essential to our healing from our personal wounds. And now we want to set up this back and forth where we take time in session to feel what we need to feel and process it and discharge it. And then we're out in the world doing things about changing the world. And then that's helping us feel some hope, and it's helping us feel some power that we're then able to take back to our sessions for further healing work on the wounds that we got. And so since so many of our early wounds are about what happened in our experiences of education, this is an issue that we really have to pay attention to and get outspoken about in the world. Then moving into the last part of the lesson is to talk about what the technique is. And I try to, in as many lessons as possible, once we're past the beginning lessons 1 through 8, to leave you with a technique to work on in your next session or in your next several sessions. And so what I'd like to see you work on in the time ahead is appreciation and self-appreciation. So I'm going to say a few things about that. I'm talking about appreciation of the client by the counselor, and I'm talking about the client doing self-appreciation. So when I talk about appreciation by the counselor, I'm talking about looking for opportunities during the session to point out things that you like and appreciate about the client. And anytime there's a pause and you feel the need to say something but you don't know what to say, you always have appreciation as your fallback. Keep it in mind that any time in a session when you can't quite figure out what to do in the counseling role, just start telling the client what you like about them, what you've noticed about their courage, what you've noticed about their intelligence, what you've noticed about their warmth and friendliness, what you've noticed about what they have accomplished in life. Anything you can tell them that's not a reference to their wounds or their past terrible events is going to make a difference to their ability to work on what they want to work on. And appreciation is going to be more effective the more specific it is and the more detailed it is. What I mean by specific is that it's really about them. Like let's say the opposite of specific, something extremely general would be to say, you're just such a good person. Not a bad thing to say to your client. In fact, I do say that sometimes. I'm not saying we shouldn't say the more general things. But those typically are not going to sink in to the client as much as appreciations that are really concrete and specific. To say, rather than, oh, you're just such a good person, to say, wow, I've noticed how kind you are to your children, or I've noticed how kind you are to animals. I'm just picking that example at random, but the point is that it's something that's specific to what you've noticed about them, that's detailed, and where the client is likely to be able to recognize himself or herself in what you're saying. Like, oh yeah, that's me. And since we all carry this load of internal messages saying we're not that great, an appreciation has to sort of fight its way past all these, you might think of them as guards, but they're not good guards, they're bad guards that are inside of us, that are really the old negative messages we're carrying, that are trying to keep any positive message from getting in. So when you're the counselor and you're appreciating the client, you're trying to figure out how to say an appreciation that's going to be able to get past those guards. And an appreciation that is clearly about that person is more likely to be able to get past the guards and be able to sink in. And then an appreciation that you really feel, in other words, that it's sincere and heartfelt, is more likely to get past those guards and be able to sink into the client so that the person can really feel it. Notice at other times what you like and appreciate about the client. During parts of the session where you're not involved in appreciating the person, just note them. It's like file them away and think, ooh, I really like that about the person. I'm going to look for the right time to get that in there, to find a way to say it. As an exercise, I'm encouraging you in your next session or your next 3 or 4 sessions to go ahead and appreciate your client, even if it feels a little forced or a little artificial. We don't want to do things long term that are forced or artificial, but when we're first learning a technique, it's important to put it into practice soon so that it becomes part of our toolkit. And so practice it even if it feels a little odd. And then at your next session or your next few sessions, ask your client at some point to tell you what they appreciate about themselves. And there might be a point during the main part of their turn where that sort of fits. If not, do it kind of at the end of their turn, but before you do present time, at the end of that third kind of main phase of the session. Say, let's spend a few minutes, and I want you to tell me a little bit, what you're proud of, or what you feel like you've done well. It's helpful with the done well part if you give them a time frame, like what you've done well in the past week or what you've done well in the past 5 years. If you try to ask, so what have you done well in your whole life, the client's mind is likely to go kind of blank. Those questions tend to be harder to answer. So give them some time frame and give them something specific, an area like what you've done well in standing up for yourself, or how you've done well in standing up for other people, or how you've taken good care of the people that you care about, how you've been a good parent. Tell me about how things that you've worked hard on that you feel proud of. So the more you can prompt them with something specific like that, the easier it's going to be for them to think of examples that are positive. Encourage your client to speak with pride. Encourage them to avoid qualifying or what the positive thing they're saying. Encourage them to avoid caveats, and try to get them to really speak wholeheartedly in positive terms about what they're proud of, what they appreciate about themselves, what they're proud of, and in other ways have liked about themselves. And to help them work through the embarrassment of that, encourage them to laugh if they're starting to feel embarrassed. Let that come out. Let those feelings be discharged. And because it's often embarrassing to talk positively about ourselves in front of somebody else because we've been told that we shouldn't do that. And this is a great opportunity to work through some of those feelings too. So that's the technique from this lesson, is appreciation and self-appreciation. Put it into practice in your next session and maybe in your next few sessions.